Dubey sir, now you can start, sir.
Okay. Good evening, friends. It's a pleasure to be back again this Sunday evening. We have with us Miss Jackie McInley. Most of us know her because she has spoken before this group earlier. But for those who don't know Jackie, I'll briefly introduce her. Ms. Jackie McInley founded and ran an independent Krishnamurti center called Open Door in southern France from 2004 until 2013, hosting monthly inquiry weekends and international gatherings. Outside these events, she also organized and facilitated local dialogue meetings in public venues for many, many years. A foreign language teacher by profession, schools, higher education, and business, she now spends her time traveling to various Krishnamurti centers and schools around the world, facilitating dialogues and programs, sharing skills in the schools, and helping out in care-related projects. Unable to travel during lockdown, she has been facilitating online programs with KFA as well as bi-weekly online dialogue groups with KFI on K-Infonet, sorry. Jackie is going to talk to us on a topic you are learning by observing yourself, by watching. So once again, a very warm welcome, Jackie, for being with us today. And thanks a lot for accepting our invitation for giving a talk before this group. Thanks a lot. So you are aware you can take up to an hour and leave about 20-25 minutes for the question answer session. So the field is yours now. Please unmute yourself. Yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Okay. So maybe it'll be a little less than an hour. I don't know, because an hour is very long. Let's see. Let's see how it goes.
That'll be all right. Yeah.
Yeah, that'll be all right. Let's see. Let's see how it progresses. So yes, so if I could repeat the title. Hello, everybody, before we begin. Lovely to see you all. As I was saying earlier, I don't know whether you were here, I keep repeating this, but feel this very strongly, that how fortunate we are to benefit from this technology that enables us, while we're in the comfort of our own homes, to be able to get together, to exchange together, to open up together from all over India. And of course, this technology means we can do it all over the world. So I really take this moment to appreciate this and the wonderful aspect that this has come out of the pandemic. You know, I don't know whether we would have done this otherwise. So just a quick call out to that, how fortunate we are, and the possibilities that it opens up for us all without having to travel. We can engage in this very serious inquiry into who we are, what we are, and how the human being is constantly creating a world, constantly creating an environment that he or she seems to forget he has created. So that environment is constantly being manifested, as you might say, in India, which is able to see these things because of your ancient culture. You have this more in your minds, this idea that the human being actually manifests reality. In the West, this is still, in a very materialistic world, this doesn't quite have the same impact. So we're here looking at all of that which we create, the environment that we create around ourselves. And the topic that I chose is very connected to this. It is, you are learning by observing yourself, by watching. This is a quote from Krishnamurti. And I'll say it again. You are learning by observing yourself, by watching. This cuts through many of our notions of what learning is and what observing is. So both in the world of learning and whatever observing means, and we will go into this, our very notions of learning, our very notions of observation is creating the world we live in. It's creating the education system that we uphold and that we are obliged to conform to, or that we lock into and play into. It's creating that. Our whole notion of learning is creating education, which then produces certain kinds of students, which then go on to lead our world. I mean, we all know this. But this is a very real manifestation of reality. Our minds, the way we see the world, the way we learn, the way we observe, the way we look around is all being pre-programmed. And it is that programming is creating our environment. That's going to be very much the theme of the way I'm going to be talking about this. So, first of all, even when we hear something like that, when we hear a quotation like that from Krishnamurti, you are learning by observing yourself, by watching. Our minds, and I'm sure our minds as we sit here are also prone to do this. We start thinking about what we think about all of this. It's as though our minds feed us with information. And again, that information, even as we sit here as friends, will create the environment of our meeting together. So this observation and this learning is an ongoing process that somehow is being blocked by something deep within us that goes back, projects forward to a certain kind of mindset that does not observe directly and does not learn in an opening process. It rehashes. It builds on what it already knows. We know this. We all know this. I'm just clarifying it here. And that building on what we already know is, of course, tremendously useful in our technological world. Like we said at the beginning, it's enabled our meeting to happen today. And the most high level and expert and marvelous ways of learning have produced this moment here, but it's also produced all the technology needed for medicine, for engineering, all of that. We know this. But what we are less aware of, it seems to me anyway, and I'm sure as friends together we can look at this, what we seem to be less aware of are the deeper seated attitudes, mindsets, conditioning that we have that is already shaping our observation. And not only is it shaping observation, but it is shaping the world, the environment in which we live in. Which, of course, makes what Krishnamurti spoke to us about of immense importance. Because we tend to live, don't we, with a sense that the environment, we find ourselves in this environment and we have to respond and react to it. And it is not always easy, so we struggle, we complain, we maybe celebrate if things go well, but it's the environment is out there and we're here, living that environment. But no, now we seem to be saying together, and Krishnaji was saying it before also when he spoke, that hang on, that environment is not just out there. It has also been created by us. And so we are deeply responsible for everything that takes place. It's difficult to hear this often because people often say, yes, but we don't create nature. We don't create all the events that happen. No, we don't create nature, but the way we respond to nature is very much created by us. Obviously, climate change, all the horrible things that go on in this field, the way animals are dying. We don't need to go into this, we know this, but the important thing here is that we are directly responsible for this. So I suppose this whole title, You Are Learning by Observing Yourself by Watching, is really pointing to something that we are not doing. So I wondered if together we could go into the blocks to this, into why this is the case. Why is a big word, but what are the different influences? So the first thing we need to say is that when we hear this, our minds lock in to thinking about it on our own. And here we get together like this in order to try and look at things together, not just think about it on our own. But this thinking about it on our own is the very aspect that we're looking at today. We're educated. We learn to do that. We learn to think about things on our own and then just bounce off each other. We don't learn to think together. Very, very few schools, and I hope that K schools are doing this and the other alternative schools, very, very few schools, again, as we all know, are even concerned about this. Of course, we're concerned in creating what we said just now, we're concerned in creating engineers and doctors and those who will learn the block building type of learning that creates that world, that technological world. It's a very tricky situation. But it seems imperative that at least a few of us get together and clarify this, that there is a place for the learning that is based on building blocks and accumulative knowledge in order to produce doctors, engineers, and the rest, IT experts. There's a place for that. But my goodness, what about everything else? The way we are creating our environment by not observing, but by just thinking and repeatedly reproducing our attitudes and our conditioning, which becomes the reality we live in. I was inspired to talk about this because I've just been in France working in a master's business school, and it is one of the top business schools in France. So obviously, again, we're talking about educating the leaders, the future leaders. And I was inspired to talk about this because I had to oral examine in English. So for 20 minutes, candidates after candidates would come in and we would have an interview, and it would be about world affairs and themselves, just to see how well they're able to cope with the English language. So I was on that side of things. And I was inspired because of the very stark difference between candidates who were thinking for themselves, had the minimum of self-observation and looking at the world and realizing how they may be contributing to what was happening, and just a liveliness of mind, you know, just an ability to perhaps have the seeds of a mind that is able to look at things and question things. They were the very few, but the majority of these top level candidates had been so programmed and so influenced by their education that it was very, very worrying. And yet, as soon as the examiner, the person interviewing, opened a few doors, somehow that potential in all of us is there. So we're really talking about all of us here. Huh? It's not, oh, well, we have read K and those who have not read K, them and us. No, we're all in this together. We all have this tendency to think our ways through life, to have our own ideas, to not be able to think together, to not be able to observe directly or learn whilst observing, and whilst observing ourselves, whilst watching what is taking place. And the interesting thing was, which I think is connected to what we're talking about here, those candidates that showed more of an ability to think on their feet, to be less weighed down by what they already knew and what they had already prepared. Those candidates spoke much better English the ones who had freer minds and were able to respond to the questions and the challenges of what was going on. Funny and horribly ironic and paradoxical, those candidates that had spent hours and hours preparing and learning in that traditional way, their English was far more stilted, very difficult to understand, almost closed off. It was like a perfect metaphor for what we're talking about. So that's the inspiration behind this title. So I think we need to, that was just bringing out certain aspects of it. Now we need to look more structurally, probably. What is it that we mean by learning? What is it that we mean by observation? And how is it that this inability in humanity to learn by observation, what this is bringing about? How this is even making how we think together very difficult, how it's making how we listen to each other very difficult. So it's a big subject. Krishnamurti seems to be implying here that there is another dimension that might be possible where what we learn is taking place, and we need to have the ability to see what is taking place rather than just react from memory. See things because that is the way we've always seen them. Build on what we have already seen because that is the way everybody is doing it. But there's a key word here. He's talking about observing yourself. So how does that play in? I can understand that there may be, I see that observation, the observation that the traditions, traditional education, social values are teaching me how to observe. I may not be aware of that. I may be aware of it and support the way I observe traditionally. Yes, I justify it, I defend it. But then there's a whole aspect that I'm not aware of. I've been brought up in British society with that rather dramatic history, that very pragmatic thinking that can sometimes throughout history cruelly alienate the heart. Very materialistic. I've grown up in that culture. My mother was French, so there was another color there. but it's still this very European influence. These influences, I'm not always aware of them. You might be far more aware of them, observing me. All of this conscious influence is influencing our observation. Unconscious influences from education and society, unconsciously influencing our observation. Now, again, we know these things, but is it something that can be observed in the moment? If we're saying that most of the observation we have has been built from what we already know or how we've been influenced, how is it possible to be free of that? Because surely it is happening now as we observe each other, as we listen to each other. Are we aware? Are we observing those unconscious influences, those patterns of thinking that have become invisible to us, but that lead our lives? Are we aware of that taking place? Often not, because it is very rarely encouraged as being something we should actually be aware of. So this observing, learning by observing oneself is becoming stranger and stranger, because, and it is écarté, the French would say. It's the boat is really leaving the harbor more and more. On the one hand, we have this learning, and this learning that is so formal and traditional, and there's no problem, it will produce all the right people and the world will be fine, which goes on and on and on, and it obviously the world is not fine. And then we carry on observing each other and listening to each other through the filters of what we expect or judge to be correct or not. And we carry on doing it because that seems to be fine. Otherwise, we wouldn't do it. So what Kay is saying here is beginning to appear more and more radical. It seems to be concerned with a very different dimension of things. So how do we do that? How do we cut through all our influences? How is it possible to see what is so invisible in everyday life when we are absorbed in patterns, habits, our jobs, our relationships? How would that be possible to cut through that? Do we even see it as a problem? So what is this? What are we talking about here? What is this learning that comes with observing ourselves as we are? Which means now. How in the schools will it be possible to introduce a very different kind of learning? Let's be realistic. If we start talking about observing ourselves, there will be anxiety that the programs, the building block programs, the cumulative knowledge programs will not be in operation. I mean, this is a reality. And there's something about the operating nature of a cumulative knowledge that really is like a machine that once you set it in motion, it really doesn't want to be interrupted. Time and the future and looming examinations and needing to get things done, it just becomes part of the whole machinery. These are big questions. And often I see in myself, I see in my friends, we have this tendency to be able to think about these problems, attempt to, again, put into practice things that we have thought about. But somehow, is that observing? Is that this learning by observation? It's better to think about these things, to challenge ourselves, but it seems like there's another dimension that's being hinted at. So there seems to be some kind of quality of observation that we're addressing here. It's not just seeing, almost as though it were two-dimensional and seeing, like we've been saying, always from how we've already seen things. So how do we go from this two-dimensional observation, two-dimensional learning, which is reproducing, continuing what came before, changing things to convince ourselves that we are doing it differently, but really it's just the same thing. So how do we go from that two-dimensional learning and observing to a different kind of learning and observing. Does it have something to do with time? Yes, obviously it does. Since we've been saying that what we already know is greatly influencing who we are and how we see and how we interact. So obviously, yes, that is time, isn't it? That is the past. So obviously we are highly attached to the past. And again, very interestingly, yes, it's producing the future because it's creating where we're going. That's what we've been saying for the last half an hour. So again, how, what must take place for this to change? The title we're looking at, you are learning by observing yourself, by watching this present continuous, this learning, observing. So are we talking about something that's taking place now? But how can we look at what is taking place now? How can I look at that if I am already greatly conditioned by the past? Now, these questions are not the kind of questions that are being asked by any of us in order to confuse. They are questions that are being asked in order to challenge our ways, challenge our deep-seated habits that are happening in every moment. So they're strong challenges, but they already have a quality that is saying, almost like putting the challenge puts its hand on our human arms and says, wait a bit, stop, look, watch. You don't need any diplomas for that. You don't need any status for that. You don't need even a particularly brilliant mind for that. What seems to be needed is a hitting rock bottom in a way, I feel like saying, but perhaps before we hit rock bottom, just a concern, isn't it? Aren't we all very concerned about what's going on? And then even in our lives, we can sometimes walk into walls. You know, we have these problems of relationship that sometimes seem insurmountable, create great stress. And there too, our way of responding to those challenges, those difficulties, both in the world and in our private lives, that way of responding is part of what we're looking at now. I seem only able to respond out of very, very unconscious patterns that have built up. Social patterns, psychological patterns. So somehow we have to stop. Something about learning and observing yourself, watching, has something to do with stopping. A pause in whatever is taking place at any moment. There always seems to be the opportunity to pause. What happens in this pause? The education system will not pause. It is, like we were saying, constantly building, constantly moving, wanting to achieve, wanting to get through, wanting to have. It's all a process of accumulation, succeeding. But here we're looking at something very, very different. But which is connected, because all those systems of education must benefit, must begin somehow to have this quality coming, this different quality of learning that learns by what? Learns about the influence, learns about the weight from the past that we're carrying. Doesn't just move forward with the weight of this knowledge to manifest more knowledge. It also brings in something different. But it never pauses, that system. The world never pauses. It's very rare that you would see a politician in the middle of a speech suddenly stops, wonders about themselves. But who is speaking? What exactly is being said? This would be a very strange occurrence. It never happens. So somehow a group of us who are concerned with all of this, that are beginning to see that we carry these patterns, we carry this lack of observation, we carry this time that is influencing everything, and that is preventing us from learning about the essential things. The essential I'm proposing is the fact that we are already conditioned. That is the essential. The essential being we are beings that cannot sit in nature and just open. So pause. Can we pause? As part of learning by observing ourselves. This pause is very interesting because as it is done, because we are not used to this pause, the mental machinery doesn't have that as part of its program. It has incessant, continuous movement as part of its program. So when we do pause, we may actually notice something. We may actually notice stress. Well, that seems a bit paradoxical, Jackie. Yes, isn't it? So that when this whole past, this whole conditioning, this whole influence, all these patterns that shape our thinking and our observation and shape the world we create, yes, while they're continuing, strangely, it lulls us into a full sense of no stress. This is very interesting. So that when there is actual pause, as people, as human beings, we may start to feel a little stressed. That anxiety, that disturbance, that uneasiness could be the beginning of the breaking through and the beginning of looking at what we actually are. I propose that that may be a reason why we don't learn this way. In education, we were saying the schools are not going to accept this kind of thing because we've got to get on with the program. So obviously there's going to be stress there. But even as individuals, right at the level of the present moment, if there is a pause, there might be unease because we are so used to this habitual way, keeping us balanced, so-called balanced. So I'm suggesting this may be a reason why we don't learn by observing directly to the present moment. A pause brings in the present moment. It is there. Because it's not being filled with all those other things, it suddenly becomes more available. So I've taken a bit of a different angle today, and I feel that that's all I really want to bring out for the moment. It would be very nice, I'm looking at the time, if it would be very nice if for a while we could go into these things together. I wonder if that would be okay, Dubey, if we did this. Ask questions to each other.
Thank you, Jackie. I think you have taken it very well. The unfortunate part is that in all our life, right from our childhood, the importance is always given to the accumulative learning in school, in life, everywhere. Not that we have not experienced learning by observation or watching. All of us have at one time or the other. But, you know, our conditioning, our whole attitude towards gaining something to profit something for us, that overtakes. And I especially like the word you used, that one has to stop, one has to pause. That is very, very important in observation or watching. In fact, I remember in one of the question answer sessions, somebody asked Krishnaji that, sir, I have heard you for 40 years and I've not reached anywhere. And Krishna said, sir, you have to stop to reach anywhere. So first of all, you have to stop.
Mm.
So I think metaphorically, that's what it is. One has to pause. The mind has to have to become still, quiet. Then only you can observe things or watch things. Thank you so much, Zaki. Very well taken. I think you have brought in a new perspective. Very well done. Thank you. I think Dr. Harshad Parekh wants to say something. Yes, sir. Unmute yourself.
Yes. Are you able to hear my voice?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, thank you, Jackie. You spoke very, very clear. I understood every word, and the way you spoke, there was a pause between the words, between the sentence, and Krishnaji was also speaking very clear and with a lot of silence between the sentence. So this is very, very important. A person who wants to communicate something of this nature, non-verbal looking, it has to come, the words may come from silence, which can affect the listener. Mm. And that's why Krishnaji was asking question to even children, how do you look at a tree? How do you look at the face of your friend? So he was suggesting that there is a different way of looking, not a normal looking with thinking and with the previous knowledge, but there is a way of looking, listening in silence, non-verbal. And in that there is great beauty, love, all these good qualities exist. And I feel that in Krishnamurti schools, we have created a beautiful environment, lot of nature, silence, lot of space, and questioning. But in spite of that, I feel that very, very few students and even teachers have the ability to look inward with that sense of pause, with a curiosity, with silence, to look at what is happening within oneself. Because the thinking and feeling, we live mostly in this two-dimensional plane of thinking and feeling, and intellect is a part of that. But Krishnamurti is pointing out a different dimension, which is like coming out from thinking, feeling, the flat plane, coming above and then looking at thinking and feeling very, very clearly. And Krishnamurti calls that as choiceless awareness or intelligence or perception or insight. Many, many words he's using, that there is a possibility in human beings to look clearly at thinking and feeling from a different dimension. And when this kind of awareness is awakened in a human being, the human being can even see if there is an anger is arising or a conflict or fear or all these problems of psychological nature can be seen very, very clearly. And when it is seen, then there is an end. So perception is the action, and also Krishnamurti says that freedom is at the beginning, not at the end, and that is something very strange, but I think it is true. How do we look inward? In our schools and colleges, we acquire a lot of knowledge about the world which is outside, but we don't ask questions like, what is boredom? What is anger? What is behind it? So when a person is interested in asking these questions about our thoughts and feelings, from where it comes, that requires a curiosity. And many people are passionate about football or music or any languages. But when a person becomes passionate in looking inward, then there is a real learning happens. And very, very few people have that ability, the passion to look inward. And people who are able to look, then life becomes very, very enjoyable, very creative. And otherwise, we deteriorate in this, just using intellect thinking to solve the problem. And the problems created by thinking cannot be solved by thinking. One needs a different level coming out of thinking and looking at thinking. Then there is a direct learning. So, okay, I have said enough. Thank you very much.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Harshad. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think we have Mr. Dinesh Waghmare. Yes, please go ahead.
Are you able to listen to me, Jackie?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
My question is, why can't we introduce both type of teachings in the existing system? One way is what you said, the programming is going on and the existing system, you know very well. Another is to look directly with the pause. If you introduce, this is what my views are, if you introduce both the things, then a child may able to learn it at the initial days itself, to look with the pause. See, to cultivate pause in intellect is very easy. You can train him. Similarly, you can also train him to tackle his emotions and feelings, and to, if possible, to go beyond that dimension also of your intellect as well as feeling and emotions. What do you have to say on this? My views are both can exist simultaneously.
Well, I have spoken a lot. Maybe it would be nice to hear what other people also are saying about this. Harshad was really bringing out many aspects of this question. I think what I liked so much about what Harshad was pointing at, he was talking about something awakening. And I think that has a connection to this pause that we're talking about, because something awakening in the mind, it's like we can't think this out. We can't tell each other what's the best thing to do and the left, you know, it's something, some light needs to go off. And that light, as Harshad was also suggesting, has something to do with looking directly at what we are. So in education, it is possible this. As he was saying, if a teacher doesn't just say, don't be bored, but begins to look at with the children, what is this boredom? But the teacher themselves must come from a place where the watching and the looking is awake in them. They are actually doing this watching. It is woken up. It's like the mind is awake to this interest, this curiosity, as he was saying. Then it is not just the sharing of information, is it? It's you as a teacher are actively engaged in this interest. And it's that creates an environment, as we were saying, is the way I look at it.
Sir, you are muted, sir.
Yes, Mr. Pradeep Verma, please go ahead, sir. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. Is it audible, Jackie?
Yeah.
Yes.
Audible? Okay, okay. Today's topic is very interesting. I will say most important. This tells about the whole philosophy of what he was talking about. It has 4 important actions, human actions: learning, observing, yourself, started with you, and watching. 4 important actions. Is there an observer in self-observing? That is the basic question.
Mm-hmm.
When self is conditioned, which usually is a mixture of facts and fictions, what are the chances that one gets the true picture in that very moment? Another related question is whether learning is momentary, ideally followed by unlearning to receive the next moment fully. Is there a continuity in learning as thoughts? And one observation, what is the only important moment, including me, of course, that becomes instrumental in ensuing actions? What we are emphasizing is what should be. What is and what should be. What we are emphasizing is what should be. A change, a transformation, entirely based on mind. Even quality of objects, to me, these are some very basic questions, because we have been learning all this. He talked about it for almost more than 5 decades. But the overall situation in our peer group and around in the world remains the same. So we have to think what exactly is wrong and where it is. It starts with individual and then collective, or whatever it is. Please, thank you very much for giving me this chance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Dinesh Waghmare.
Jackie, you said that in thought time is involved. So basically what we are struggling is with the time in a way. So if this time is sort of eliminated and we give training in the initial stages of the child, then probably the things will be different, because otherwise also whatever we are talking, we got the pointers from JK that this looking with pause and with awakening. Only thing is we got it at a later, in the later stage of our life. So time, that's why we are struggling with the time of thought. What do you have to say on this?
I think before Jackie says, I want to point out it is not that simple that you tell the child and it gets done.
Yeah, I agree.
As a teacher, are you free to watch? That is more important. So I think before you ask that question, you should ask yourself, are you free to watch? Kismuti schools have been doing it since last 1995 years. So it's not that this is not being done, but it's not that you start that and the child gets it. It's not that easy. And that Jackie can add to it if she wants to.
Yes. I would like to.
Yes, I unmuted you. Yes, go ahead, Dinesh ji.
No, I wanted to listen from her views. What are her views?
Well, I think that's a very good point, Dubey. which is what we're saying, isn't it? It's almost like we say we want to solve the problem of time, and yet in saying that, we're wanting to get hold of, we want to understand something that we can then reproduce over and over again, which again is time. If you see what I'm saying, there's a huge paradox there. So I would say that this problem of time is, we are time. And do we have the interest and the curiosity, as Harshad was saying, to observe this? And can we do this as it is taking place, in exactly the same way as nature is taking place? And can a teacher live that? Have that interest, have that curiosity to observe time, what she or he already knows, bring it out? Is boredom being created because I'm actually expecting something to happen? It's not happening in the way I wanted, like it should be. But can I be interested in that whole process? And as I said before, that very interest is what is, I wouldn't even say being transmitted, it's coming into being. That I feel it creates an environment of learning, both for the teacher and for the student. I hope that answers your question a little.
Yeah. Okay, Harshad bhai.
Yeah. This reminds me of one professor who had studied Krishnaji's teachings for 30 years. And he came to Krishnaji and said, "Sir, I have studied your teachings for 30 years." And that professor could give talks on Krishnamurti also. But this professor admitted that he said to Krishnaji that though I have studied your teachings for 30 years, I have not moved at all. That means I have not changed. And Krishnaji said, you have not moved because you have not stopped. So here is a paradox, but it is a very beautiful paradox that just by gathering the knowledge, we don't understand. It becomes a burden if we are just gathering the knowledge without looking inward with silence. And that can happen only when a person is very passionate, very curious, has the energy, freedom to look. And I would say that even if a teacher is very good, very enlightened, but he may not be able to awaken that insight in the listener or his disciple, if the disciple doesn't have that kind of curiosity and energy to look inward. So it is a two-way thing. Not only teacher, but a student also must have that desire or curiosity to look inward, as an ability to pause and look. Okay, I have said enough.
Thank you, Harshad. Jackie, there is a question from Shakti ji from Rajghat. I think he has problem with his audio. He says, sometimes it is a very fine line between observing ourselves and concentrating on our inner thought feeling. It's same about the outer world too. Is it just an intellectual comment, or has it been a problem with you as well while watching yourself? You want me to read?
Yeah, I don't quite get it.
Yeah. Sometimes it is a very fine line between observing ourselves and concentrating on our inner thought feelings.
Mm.
It's same about the outer world too. Is it just an intellectual comment, or has it been a problem with you as well while watching yourself?
Mm. Mm-hmm. When he says you, he means me as an individual, as a yeah.
I guess so.
Of course, it's an ongoing, I would say, it's an ongoing interest. Yes, this is not intellectual. Yes, it's not intellectual suppositions or suggestions. It's really coming from what one observes. Yes, and I think if I understand the question correctly, there is a fine line between this kind of introspection. I think this is what he might be getting at, this sort of introspection and the seeing of what is taking place. I think if that's what he's talking about, it's very, very interesting, because yes, there have been times when I myself have been going into a question and one can get lost in the details and sort of like a self-analysis. Also moved by certain emotional reactions that are not seen at the moment, in the moment that they are being felt, that it is also pre-conditioned, has been put in place beforehand, and it's very difficult to see that. However, I've just noted, I think this is why it's something about the quality. Again, we get back to this pausing. You see, pausing is not decided by me. Pausing is just something we're saying, if it can happen, obviously I stop, but I then do not control what takes place in that pause. The pause is an opportunity to see things as they are without being led by patterns, but see the patterns in operation. And it is it's the very seeing that it's rather subtle to put into words, this kind of thing, but it's something about the unconscious. It's something about that it breaks through the motor of the machinery somehow, and the breaking through of that creates something new. And that thing, that new element, is not part of introspection. That new thing created is free of what has already been before. There's something there. I hope that answers the question a little.
Thank you, Jackie. Anandji, please go ahead.
Yes, Jackie. I mean, these are my observations. I mean, I'm not looking for any answers. Actually, when we're talking about learning and observing, I mean, can I see that I am not free? It is very essential for me. There has to be freedom to look at something, to observe something, to learn something. The question is, I'm looking at it, am I free? The next is, we always say that the children should learn. We want them to teach them, or we want them to change. We want other people to change. Like Kay says, I mean, he says, I mean, you're the teacher and you're the student. I mean, it's not that you're only the teacher, you're also the student. But have I looked at myself as a student at any given point in time, as a father or as a son or whatever it is? I mean, have I looked at that is a question. That's what I'm looking at. When I'm not trying to, the question is, there's no point trying to change the children or change somebody else. The question is, I mean, can I see that I'm conditioned, that I'm not free? So can I look at that is what I would say. That's about all.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Ranjana, would you please unmute yourself and ask your question? Ranjana, please unmute yourself. I think she is not there. Would you ask your question, please?
No question, sir. I put some chat. Are you able to hear, sir? Are you able to hear?
I think your voice is echoing. There's something wrong with you.
Are you able to hear, sir? Are you able to hear?
Echo.
Okay.
There is an echo in your voice, yes. We'll come back to you later. We can go to Dinesh Waghmare. Yes, please ask the question.
Jackie, are you able to listen to me? My question is, which I'm just curious to know, why the mind is moving or thinking only in terms of either or. It's either moving with the conditioning or moving with the pause or without the conditioning. Why it cannot go one step above and see both the things simultaneously and move with both the things, and then the intelligence or wisdom takes action?
Yeah, I think you're bringing up a good point here, because when we listen to all of this, or when we get interested in all of this, we can fall into a little bit of a trap, as I see it. I don't know what you all feel about this, but we want to somehow achieve the end of conditioning, and it is an either or. But how can it be an either or if the fact of pause doesn't mean that I'm free of conditioning? It just means that when there is pause, I am not driven so inevitably by the conditioning. It just creates a hiatus. It creates a break in that drive. That's the way I see it. Then the work begins. The work, which is the title here, the learning in observing ourselves. Because there, in that pause will be full of what we are, no? But it means then that we start to see that, well, hang on, what is this observation? Somebody brought that up. Is that observation centered? Is it me observing? Or is it somehow, is there another quality of observation? So you see all these questions will bubble up in the pause. But the pause itself, as I say, breaks from this drive that ignores the fact that perhaps the observer is coming from a center. In fact, the machinery needs the center, needs the observation to come from the path. You know, all of this. So the pause is like to see the wonder of it all taking place.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you. I think we have come to the close of the session now. And I want to thank Jackie on behalf of the Indore Study Circle. Thank you so much for being with us and bringing about a new dimension in observation and watching. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Next Sunday, we'll have Mr. S. Madhavan. He'll be speaking to us. So next Sunday at 11 o'clock. Those who are free, please join us. Thank you. Good night.
Thanks. Thanks, Jackie.
Good night. Bye-bye.